Hi, good morning. I'm Charlotte. Welcome to Wake Up Well this morning. I wonder if you've ever heard of an oxymoron. I remember learning about these at school. Now, an oxymoron is a figure of speech, a figure of language where you put two words together that seem to contradict one another, but when they're put together, they make a true and sometimes even a positive statement. And so I went online and I found an article called 101 Awfully Good Examples of Oxymorons. Awfully good. There's an oxymoron for you there. And so here are some examples of oxymorons, of two words together that seem to contradict but actually make a true statement. So here's one example: a working vacation, virtual reality, clearly confused, a constant variable, deafening silence. So many examples, 101 in fact, of oxymorons, two words together that seem not to go together, but when put together, actually, they mean something that's really positive and true. And I saw an oxymoron in today's passage in Isaiah 42, verses 1 to 7. And so I'll read that passage and then I'll talk about the oxymoron that I see right at the beginning of that passage. So Isaiah 42, verses 1 to 7. Look at my servant whom I strengthen. He is my chosen one who pleases me. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring justice to the nations. He will not shout or raise his voice in public. He will not crush the weakest reed or put out a flickering candle. He will bring justice to all who have been wronged. He will not falter or lose heart until justice prevails throughout the earth. Even distant lands beyond the sea will wait for his instruction. God the Lord created the heavens and stretched them out. He created the earth and everything in it. He gives breath to everyone, life to everyone who walks the earth. And it is he who says, I, the Lord, have called you to demonstrate my righteousness. I will take you by the hand and guard you. I will give you to my people Israel, as a symbol of my covenant with them. And you will be a light to guide the nations. You will open the eyes of the blind. You will free the captives from prison, releasing those who sit in dark dungeons. So this is a really interesting passage. This is the first of the so-called servant songs in the book of Isaiah. And these are poetic passages that speak of God's servant who will bring both justice and salvation to Israel and beyond. And Isaiah uses the word servant quite a lot. And we as Christians in this passage, as we look at this example of God's servant, we see Jesus as the servant. Because in Matthew chapter 12, Matthew tells us that Jesus fulfilled these very words from this passage in Isaiah. And so we see an explanation of Jesus, a description of Jesus, an example perhaps for us to follow as followers of Jesus. Jesus, the servant, the one who God chose. But here's the oxymoron, okay? So the oxymoron, two words that seem to contradict, but together actually mean something that is very true. So Isaiah 42 verse 1 says, look at my servant whom I strengthen. He is my chosen one who pleases me. I will put my spirit upon him. He will bring justice to the nations. And so the oxymoron I saw there was the words servant. This whole passage is about God's servant and justice. Again and again in this passage, we hear about God's justice. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear the word servant and the word justice, I often have two very different ideas by those two words. When I think of servant, I think of being meek, being humble, being very helping to other people. But often when I hear justice, I think about righteous anger. I think about, doing things, getting things done, activism. I don't tend to link the two together, but God does in this passage and beyond. And a crucial role of the servant in this passage is that he will bring justice to the nations. And the Hebrew word that's used here, that's translated as justice, is mishpat. I don't know if my pronunciation is right, but mishpat is how it's written. And this means more than just fairness in court. It's not that kind of justice. It refers to right government in a much broader sense. It's about God's servant ruling the nations in righteousness. And so when we acknowledge this, when we see Jesus as this servant that's going to bring justice, going to lead the world, the nations in righteousness, we get the invitation to offer ourselves in humble service to God, to become servants of the servant. And so this morning, I just want you to think a little bit about that oxymoron, the idea of God's servant, Jesus, coming to bring justice. And what does it look like for Jesus? What does it look like for us if we are to bring justice, but to be servants? What might that mean for you? Where do you see that in the life of Jesus? And what might God be saying to you this morning through that oxymoron? God's servant, here to bring justice. Bless you this morning.